Okay, just wanted to go over some of the best practices and what is referred to as the 12 principles of animation. We're going to be taking a look at how this can apply to all of our animations, and just want to give you an overview and a visual of basically what these terms mean. I'm going to be using a lot of these terms throughout the course, and I want to make sure that it's a little bit more clear on what exactly we're discussing. These terms are basically created by the 12 principles of animation were created based on the book by Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, The Illusion of Life. It's basically the most well-regarded kind of the Bible of animation. It basically is kind of what it's become. It's basically every animator's first book that they essentially will need to read and kind of understand when it comes to any type of animation, whether it's 2D, 3D, or stop motion. Anything that's animated is always going to pretty much revolve around these principles that these two animators kind of set in play. There was basically 9 animators. They were called the 9 old men that worked for Disney with some of the classic features, and they were kind of the pioneers and the visionaries that kind of created animation in a believable style that is still used and applied today for all your favorite movies and games. All animators are always trying to abide by these rules and try to create animations basically revolving around the concepts put out in this book by these two individual animators that worked for Disney throughout the years. I'm just going to go through these briefly. I think visually you can kind of see for yourself exactly what all of these mean, but I don't want to just touch base on them really quickly. Some of them apply to 3D animation, and some of them are applied a little bit differently. So squash and stretch is essentially when an object is in movement, whether it's a object or a character, when something makes contact, or if it basically translates down or moves down quickly or moves up quickly, the character or the object will squash down and stretch up. One thing to remember when you're applying squash and stretch is that it still needs to be a character or an object that has mass. So you wouldn't be able to squash or stretch an amount of mass that doesn't really exist in the object. So if you go too far with a squash and a stretch, you can still start to get some unnatural movement if the actual mass of what is squashing and stretching doesn't actually have that amount of mass. We'll be touching base on this with our ball bounce as well, to kind of show you a little bit of how this works with Maya in the 3D space. With timing and motion, it's basically creating these movements. This character or this object here in this example is moving left and right. If you take a look at the line ticks that are there, those represent the keyframes and also the spacing of this animation. So you can see in the top movement, the top example, obviously it's moving a lot faster, but you can also see that the spacing is a little bit different as the object is moving faster in the middle of the animation. And that's indicated by the ticks being further apart from each other. The closer the ticks are to each other indicates that the spacing is slower and that the object is slowing down or losing velocity. So understanding the timing and the motion, and basically understanding when I refer to spacing, it's referring to these ticks and how basically the character or the object is moving throughout space, and the speed and the varied timing of how that object is moving throughout the timeline or the graph editor. Anticipation, if you take a look at this example, the object kind of leans back, stretches, and then moves forward. Anticipation kind of just gives the user an idea of something that is about to happen. So it kind of gives the eye kind of a breather before a movement happens. This applies to games. When you're basically going to do an attack, a lot of times a character will lean back or create an extreme anticipation pose before they strike. This creates power, but it also kind of gives an indicator to the user that something big is about to happen, and it gives the eye a sense to basically see that there's this momentum behind this powerful force that is about to happen. So without anticipation, things can start to lose weight and start to move without any purpose. When you take a look at big movements, if you're going to throw an object or something like that, usually you'll need some type of anticipation to kind of build that momentum up before the action actually takes place. For staging, it's a little bit more towards the cinematic presence of when you're making a movie or another type of animations. Basically, you want to make sure that your camera and your character are presented in a way that is appealing and easy for the user or the viewer to understand. Staging in this particular course isn't going to be really that prevalent, since we're not really dealing with a lot of camera or particular moves that are going to have a fixed camera. Most of these animations are going to be free form, where they could be placed in a game or just an exercise. But staging is a very critical piece if you're going to be dealing with any camera work. The follow through and overlap is basically when you have objects that are attached to a moving part. So that could be an arm, it could be some hair, ears. Essentially, when an object moves, there's going to be a kind of reaction from this other piece that is following the other object. So in this case, it's a tail. So as you see the object zip from screen left to right, you're going to see the tail straighten up, and then you're going to see kind of make that C-shaped curve as it kind of overshoots and kind of goes in front of the character or in front of the ball. And that's what's referring to as the follow through. Essentially, based on the speed of this object, there's going to be a reaction that takes place from the tail in this object, in this situation, and it's going to be affected by the movement of the speed and how that object is moving. So putting follow through and overlap into your animations is just going to create more believability, more weight, and it's going to start to look a lot more realistic when you start to add those character traits to the animation. Straight ahead and pose to pose refers really to just how the animation is keyed and how you're animating the scene. Basically, if you're going straight ahead, you're basically just animating the animation as it takes place in order. If you're doing a pose to pose, you will kind of create the core key poses first and then go and add breakdowns. So in this particular situation, frames 1, 2, and 3 or your keyframe extreme poses, and then they're going back into frame 4 and frame 5, adding some in-between keyframes to kind of break down those movements so that the movement is smooth. Both of them will get you the same results. It's just a different workflow and a different option. And as we work through our animations, I'm going to be showing you how to work with both of those options. With straight ahead and pose to pose, there's really no right or wrong method. It's really just your workflow, your speed, what you're comfortable with. Sometimes it'll be a mix of both. You might even do one animation straight ahead, and then you might come and do another one with a pose to pose type of approach. It really doesn't really matter as long as the animation looks great. The user and the viewer is never going to know. You just want to understand the workflow and the process just for terminology. For slow in and slow out, it goes back to that timing and motion. If you look at the spacing here again with those ticks, you can see that the object is moving left and right pretty evenly, but you can see that at the middle, you're seeing a big, basically a wide span of those of the spacing, so that the object is moving a lot faster than when it is at its extreme pose on the left and the right side. So those slow in and slow outs kind of allow the weight of the object to have a little more believability, and it helps you kind of create timing that isn't quite so even. In this particular case, it is even on the left and right side, but what it's referring to is basically how it slows in and slows out to the pose as it moves left and right. And that's indicated with the spacing lines in this particular example. Arcs are really important. Everything that we animate is going to be keeping this in mind. So wrists, neck and head, knees, your root controllers, your hips, everything is going to be moving along arcs. And when I refer to things looking too linear or too stiff or too straight, a lot of times what it's lacking is some arcs in the movement. And the more cartoony the object is, the more arcs you'll have. But essentially, even realistic animations or even realistic motion capture, where the animators are going to be adding some nice little arcs and subtle movements in there to just basically create an appealing motion. Everything in the world doesn't necessarily always move in a perfect arc, but with animation, we can kind of make things look prettier in animation than they look in real life. And basically, all animators are going to be most of the time trying to create movements and body pieces that are moving in arcs at all times. And that's what we're going to be trying to accomplish in a majority of our exercises. Exaggeration really refers to just pushing those poses to an extreme. So in this example, the exaggeration is in the middle, and as well as how this ball is jumping up and squashing down and jumping back up again. So the exaggeration is just referring to the type of pose, and it could be the type of movement. It's just basically accentuating and enhancing a pose or a motion to be a little more entertaining and to kind of create a pose that's a little more interesting than something that might be a little more subdued or toned down. A secondary action typically is basically what it sounds like. It's an action that is taking place after a main action of another object. So in this particular case, this large ball is hitting the ground, and that ground is affecting the smaller ball on the right side. So it's almost like a seesaw type of action, that once that ball hits the ground, it's creating a force that's making the other ball on the right side react to the force and the momentum of the object that's happening on the left side. These things could be, referred to as, in an attack. If a weapon was to strike, a character, the secondary action could be the other character reacting. It could also be just some of the bounce back that occurs on the character's weapon as it, kind of bounces, off the chest of the other character if it was striking, another character in place. So there's a lot of situations where secondary action can take place in the animation space. It's more of a term to be familiar with and to kind of think about as it pertains to weight when things are interacting with each other. The solid drawing aspect really for 3D animation really is going to refer to solid posing. Since we're not really drawing anything in Maya, the drawing is going to be referred to just solid posing, and that kind of goes towards a silhouette and some of the other principles and concepts that we'll be talking about to try to basically get what they're referring to in terms of drawing. It's essentially just making a really great pose that reads well from all angles. Appeal also really is another one that applies to 2D animation, but we can also apply it to 3D animation as well. We just always want our characters to be in appealing poses and to have a personality that really connects with the audience. This can often be done with how a character is posed or positions themselves within the scene or within the game. And those two kind of go hand in hand, more so with the 2D aspect, but again applies to the 3D posing of how we pose the character in the Maya space to create something that appeals to the audience.